going to be reading the first book of the Beast Quest series, Ferno the Fire Dragon by Adam Blade, starting with chapters 1 and 2. Beginning with the prologue. Quest's End. Caldor the Brave stood at the foot of the misty mountain. The knight's bronze armor gleamed in the pale morning sunlight. He gripped a heavy sword. Turning to his squire Robin, he used his weapon to point up the mountainside. "I'll climb above the mist," Caldor told the boy. "The dragon is close by, I can feel it. I just need to get above the mist so that I can see it. For the sake of our kingdom, it must be stopped." "Good luck, sir," Robin said in a shaky voice, as the knight turned to climb up the smooth, dark slope of the mountain. Caldor struggled to keep his footing on the overlapping plates of rock. They were slippery as glass, but the knight was determined and slowly but surely made his way up the mountain. He was soon lost from sight, swallowed by the eerie mist. Robin had never seen a mountainside like this before. With his master gone, he noticed how quiet he was. He shivered, although the air was warm. Suddenly, the mountain started to shake. Robin could feel the vibrations traveling through his feet and up his legs. He stumbled to one side, and a huge shudder threw him to the ground, knocking his head so badly that his teeth clattered. There was a metallic taste in his mouth, and he put a hand to his lips. Blood! What was happening? "Caldor," Robin yelled, scrambling to his feet as the rocks shifted beneath him. "Come back!" But there was no way he could be heard above the grinding screeches that filled the air. The whole mountain shuddered, and Robin froze. Was it about to come crashing down? Robin looked up and gasped in disbelief. Two huge rocks high above him started to move. They stretched out slowly, their razor-sharp edges catching the sunlight. Robin flinched as they swiped through the air like giant axe heads. Rolling out of the way, he glimpsed Caldor high above him, clinging to the dark slope of the mountain. The spiked head of a huge beast reared up behind the knight. Its face was the same color as the slippery stones of the mountain. Its eyes glinted with dark fire. "Come down, Caldor," Robin yelled desperately. It all made sudden, horrible sense. The dragon wasn't near the mountain, it was the mountain, and Caldor was barely holding on to the monster's neck. "Caldor," Robin yelled again. But a terrifying roar drowned out Robin's words. He stumbled to his feet, his mouth open in shock. Glancing down, Robin realized that his own situation was nearly as dangerous as Caldor's. He was standing on the dragon's tail. He wanted to run, but he was frozen with fear. And as he looked up at Caldor, he knew he could not abandon his knight. Robin could only stare in disbelief as the dragon's wings unfolded overhead, stretching out to beat the air in a deadly rhythm. "It's taking off," he shouted. "Caldor, quick!" "Get back, Robin," called Caldor, still desperately clutching the creature's neck. "Go to the city. Warn King Hugo that I have failed in my quest. Run!" Robin had no chance to run. The dragon flicked its tail and sent him flying through the air. He hit the ground, shaking and gasping for breath, as the terrifying beast rose up in the air and disappeared into the mist, taking Caldor with him. For a moment, Caldor's screams filled Robin's ears. Then, to his horrified eyes, an empty piece of armor clattered to the ground beside him, scorched and smoking. The echoes of Caldor's screams hung in the air. Then they, too, were gone. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Fire. Tom stared hard at his enemy. "Surrender, villain," he cried, waving his sword above his head. "Surrender or taste my blade." The sword was only a poker, and his enemy was a sack of hay hanging from a tree in the heart of the wood. But then, Tom was not a knight. He was training to be a blacksmith. The closest he came to thrilling quests was when he ran errands for his Uncle Henry, who worked the village forge. Today, Tom was taking a sack of newly mended tools to Farmer Gretlin. Along the way, he had stopped in the forest to practice his sword-fighting moves on the dummy he had made a few weeks ago. So here's Tom practicing his sword-fighting moves. He trained whenever he could. If he had the chance to have a real sword fight, he'd be ready. Tom gave the target a firm blow with the poker. "One day I'll be the finest swordsman in all of the kingdom of Avantia," he announced, "even better than my father, Taladon the Swift." Tom had heard many people in the village praise Taladon's swordsmanship, but he had never seen it for himself. Tom's mother had died of a fever when he was just a baby. That same day, his father had left on a mysterious quest and never returned. As head of Arenell village and Tom's closest relative, Uncle Henry had announced that he and his wife Maria would raise him as their own son. Tom was grateful to his uncle and trained hard as a blacksmith's apprentice, but he often dreamed of leaving Arenell just as his father had. He wanted to taste adventure for real. Dreams just weren't enough anymore, but most of all, he wanted to find his father and ask him why he had left. Tom shoved the poker back into the sack of tools. One day I'll know the truth, he swore. Summer was giving way to autumn, and Tom shivered as he walked beneath the shadows cast by the tree's heavy branches. It was hard going along the overgrown forest path. Branches tore at Tom's clothes and scratched his face. Stumbling over tree roots, Tom struggled on. As he neared the edge of the woods, he smelled something strange. Smoke, he thought, as the sharp smell caught at the back of his throat. He stopped and looked around. Through the trees to his left, he could hear a faint crackling as a wave of warm air hit him. Fire! Tom began to push his way through the trees. Heart pounding, he forced his way through a thicket and burst into the field. The golden wheat had been burned to black stubble. A thin veil of smoke hung in the air. Small flames still licked at the edges of the field. Tom stared in horror. What had happened? A shadow fell over him. Tom looked up and blinked. For a second, he thought he saw a dark, fleeting shape disappear behind a hill in the distance. Had his eyes been playing tricks on him? Who's there? Through the smoke, Tom saw a man stamping across the field. Forgetting the shadow, he hurried forward to meet him. Did you come through the woods? Gretlen demanded. Did you see anyone who could have done this? Tom shook his head. No one. I didn't see a soul in the woods. There's evil at work here, said Gretlen, his eyes flashing angrily. Only 10 minutes ago, this wheat was as tall as your shoulders. I was working in the barn when I heard a strange noise like a fierce wind. I rushed out to find this. Gretlen stared at the blackened field. Mark my words, no ordinary fire did this, just like no ordinary fire took John Blake's horses. A shiver of fear went through Tom. John Blake lived at the edge of Arenell, and 2 weeks ago he had lost 3 of his horses during the night. Their bones were found the next day in a smoking pit at the foot of the valley, roasted and picked clean. The old ones are talking in the village, said Gretlen, shaking his head. They say dark forces are gathering. Tom looked around at the burned field and felt a wave of anger. Someone needed to stop this. If only he was older. I'd do it, he thought. I'd stop things like this happening in our kingdom. Go back to the forge, Tom, Gretlen said. Tell your uncle what's happened here. I'm worried that Arenell is cursed, and maybe all of us along with it. Chapter 2, A Real Quest. The sun hovered low and pink above the distant hills. Villagers crowded into the market square, jostling for space. Tom had never seen the square so full of people, and they just seemed to keep coming. Tom had told his Uncle Henry about the strange fire, and Henry had decided to call an emergency meeting of the whole village. Nothing like this had ever happened in Arenell before, and Tom couldn't ignore the hard knot of nervousness in his stomach. From the low murmurs coming from the crowd, he could tell that everyone else was on edge too. Uncle Henry stood on a wooden bench in front of the villagers. Tom waited off to the side with his Aunt Maria. She looked tired and worried. This meeting is open, Uncle Henry announced. Now, I've heard plenty of rumors, but let's try to deal with the facts. The troubles get worse each day, called John Blake. That's a fact. Have you seen the river, a woman asked? It's running so low that we will soon run out of drinking water. We're cursed, an old man shouted. I don't believe in curses, said Uncle Henry firmly, but it's clear that our village needs aid. Someone must go to the king and request help, while the rest of us try to figure out why this is happening. Tom smiled. He could picture himself traveling to the city to ask for help and save his village. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for, a real adventure. He stepped forward. I'll go to the palace. There were murmurs of astonishment from the crowd and a few chuckles. Trust the fate of our village to a boy? Ha! Uncle Henry spoke quietly. No, Tom, you're too young to take such a trip on your own. I will go as head of Arenell. Suddenly, a young, ragged boy smeared in soot pushed through the crowd. It was Adam from nearby Dreen Farm. Help, gasped Adam. Our hay barn is on fire. We're all cursed, wailed a woman. Gretlen, John, take 20 men and fetch water from the river, roared Henry. The rest of you bring spades, and if we can't quench the fire, we'll bury it in mud. Quickly! Aunt Maria looked at Uncle Henry as the crowd rushed to obey. These people need you here as their leader, she said quietly. You can't go, added Tom, and who else can be spared? Harvest is the busiest time of year for the whole village. Uncle Henry turned to Tom. Very well, you're young and fit, and I have to let you go out into the world sooner or later. You may go to the king's palace, but you must leave first thing tomorrow. Tom hugged his uncle. I won't let you down, he swore, turning to hug Aunt Maria as well. His heart was doing somersaults. He couldn't believe it. Tomorrow he was setting off for the palace on a real quest, a chance for adventure at last. So next time I will continue with chapter 3.